All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back. So normally this would be a question and answer session, but I believe that'll start next week. But you can start sending me in your questions, and I will bring them up and address them the next week. And I plan on it being an open question and answer. What I'll do is I'll start off with a question that somebody asked me that I thought was intriguing, and then we'll take it from there. Everyone can ask me a question. But since we don't have any questions, we're going to go right into the Parsha. And the way I like to do it is I go through a brief overview of the entire Parsha, and then I come back and maybe do a little bit of the Kabbalah behind it, the Chassidus behind it, and whatnot. So if you're not familiar with the Parsha this week, it is Parsha's Korach, which is quite interesting. Why would you name a Parsha after a seemingly very wicked person? Yeah. It says that, even says in the in Gemara, that says the names of the wicked should rot forever. Why would they name the Parsha, the entire Parsha, after Korach? And one answer that's given is there's what to emulate from Korach. He wasn't all bad. In fact, the Chayza of Lublin, the seer of Lublin, who was a Levi, just like Korach, would say, whenever Parshas Korach came around and he would give a class on Parshas Korach, he would start off saying, "My holy great-grandfather Korach used to say." So there's something very holy about Korach. And one of the things that we can emulate from Korach is his yearning to emulate, his yearning to want to be, I should say, the Kohen Gadol, because that's what it was all about. He wanted to be the Kohen Gadol. And as we spoke about before, I believe earlier in the earlier class, and I've posted about it before, the Rambam writes that everybody can be a Kohen Gadol in one way or another. What was the Kohen Gadol's job? He was supposed to live in the Beis HaMikdash and live a life of pure spirituality, which means it doesn't mean to go live in a mountaintop in the Himalayas, some faraway place that you have to divorce yourself from the world. Although the Kohen Gadol did divorce himself more or less from the world, because he had to live inside the temple or live inside the tabernacle at all times. He couldn't even go to mourn his family if they passed away. He couldn't go to a cemetery. He was not allowed to become impure. He couldn't take part in festivities outside of the temple. And there's a lot of things that happen outside of the temple. Nevertheless, the spirit of what the Kohen Gadol represented, we could all emulate, which was to be involved in things higher than the materialistic world, the external trappings. Says the Rambam, if you become that type of person, or if you strive to be that kind of person, God says, I consider that as if you're a Kohen Gadol. So this yearning, this wanting to be a Kohen Gadol, and Moses himself said, after Korach came to him and said, I want to be the Kohen Gadol, Moses said, I too want to be the Kohen Gadol. But what can I do? I can't be the Kohen Gadol. So we'll get into more of that, but let me just do a brief overview of the entire Parsha. I have many different chumashim that I read from. This is just the English, a little funny English one I found behind me in my library. So I'm going to breeze through that, and then we'll go back, like I said. So Korach, who was Korach? He was the first cousin of Moses and Aaron and Miriam. What happened? Jacob had 12 sons. In truth, he actually had more than 12 sons. He had 12 sons and a daughter, but we know that Rashi says that they had more children, right? Each one was born with a twin, but they only record 12. And that's very important for me to mention, as I probably mentioned a million times. The Torah is not a history book. The word Torah itself means hora, which means a lesson. It's a lesson book. And like I said before, things are out of order chronologically. Things are seemingly misspelled, extra words. Sentences just seem to cut off in the middle. That's because everything is trying to teach you a lesson. It's a lesson book. So the fact that it didn't mention these other children, it means it's not important in our life, in our lesson, in a lesson in life. So Levi was one of the children, and he was a very strong child. He was actually, him and Shimon killed an entire city after their sister Dinah was raped. I don't know if you guys know. Levi was 13 years old. But anyway, Levi, when he was older, he had a child. He had a few children. One of them was Kahos. And Kahos had children. One of them was Amram, and the other one was Yitzhar. Amram is the father of Moses and Aaron and Miriam, not in that order. And Yitzhar is the father of Korach. So they're first cousins. Amram was the leader of the Jewish people during the exile in Egypt, just by the way. So what happens? The tribe of Levi gets formed into two groups. One group is the Kohanim, and the other group are the Leviim. The Kohanim are there to serve the Leviim. That's their main job. While the Kohanim' main job is to be involved in the shechita, the slaughtering of the animals, the slaughtering of the sacrifices, they do not have a portion in the land of Israel. The tribe of Levi also doesn't really have a portion in the land of Israel. They have cities that are designated to live in, but it's not like they till their own land and deal with all that stuff. They still live off of the Jewish people giving them what's called truma and meiser, which we'll get into. It's in this week's Parsha. Basically like taxes. They live off taxes. Food stamps, it's a bit communism, a little communism going over there. Anyway, Korach, his biggest problem, what was Korach's biggest issue? Nepotism. He thought that Moses was showing nepotism. He appointed his brother as the Kohen Gadol, the holiest man. And then, who does he appoint as the leader of the tribe of Levi? His son, the son of Elitzaphan, the son of Korach. And he said, whoa, man, that's the last straw. So Korach gathers 250 leaders. I'm just reading through the Torah. And these weren't just any leaders, by the way. They were as Rashi says, they were the choicest of the Jewish people at the time. And the main four people that were involved, as I explained earlier, were Dasan and Aviram, Korach, and On ben Peles. And we know what happened with On ben Peles. But maybe we'll just talk about that a little bit again right now. And they say, Rav Lechem, Moses, you've taken too much for yourself. You're speaking out of line. So Moses first falls on his face and he's like, are you kidding me? Stop ticking off God. Stop testing God, making him upset. You're driving me crazy. But he said, I beg you. I too want to be the Kohen Gadol, but what can I do? And they said, no way, Jose. We want to be the Kohen Gadol. You're not any holier than us. So Moses said, fine. What's the main job of the Kohen Gadol? What makes him unique is that he can give the ketoras, the incense. Yeah, there's 12. I don't know if you guys ever see in the Siddur. When we do something in the Siddur, I'll show you what those are. We say them every day, twice a day, what they are and how the mixture was. And God says, whoever brings the ketoras, the incense, when they're not supposed to, they will die. So Moses said, I'm going big or going home over here. I want to let you know, if you bring the ketoras and you're not meant to be the Kohen Gadol, you are going to die. And they all said, okay, no problem. Now, like we said before, Korach was actually married to a very jealous woman. Korach was very wealthy and he was very intelligent and he's very holy, like we'll talk about a little bit further. But the wealth got to her head. And she was like, as they say, what in Fiddler on the Roof, one of my favorite lines. He's when he goes, if I were a rich man. Yeah, Tevye saying, if I were a rich man, all day long people would come and ask me questions, and they don't even have to be right, because when you're rich, people think you know everything. So she was rich, she felt like she knew everything. And she instigated Korach to go and stand up. So he's like, fine. On ben Peles also was, like we said, there was the story in the Gemara that we read today. He thought it would be a good idea. Then his wife said, what do you stand to gain? If Moses wins, you'll be his servant. Korach wins, you'll be his servant. Let them fight it out. And he said, what can I do? I already signed in that I was part of the team. And she's like, okay, I have an idea. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. You just drink this hard whiskey. And ultimately, that's what happened. What happened? They all died. Yeah, Korach and his crew, they brought the Keteris. Lo and behold, they died. However, They died, their family died, except for the sons of Korach. What happened? As the ground was opening up, right, there was this earthquake, this unprecedented natural disaster opened up, and as it opened up, they all went down into the earthquake. But his sons did tshuva. They said, what have we done? We're idiots. This was a bad idea. And they did teshuvah, they repented, and God decided to lift them back up. In fact, they became very holy people. And who came ultimately from Korach? The only person that the Torah has ever said has the same level of prophecy as Moses himself, Shmuel Hanavi. Samuel the prophet. Samuel the prophet comes from Korach, ultimately comes from his sons. And we read in Psalms, Tehillim, as we say, in Psalms, there are Psalms written by the sons of Korach themselves. Mizmar Shir Livnei Korach. These are the songs of the name of Korach. Whatever, we'll check it out sometime. Then the Jewish people complain against Moses and Aaron. They're like, whoa, you killed these people? Like you couldn't have done a better test? And they were still upset. So more people were dying. There was a big plague. The fact that they continued to complain, God was a little bit upset. He said they haven't learned their lesson, so I'm going to keep killing them. And Moses then tells Aaron, bring the Ketores, make the Ketores again, and that'll stop the plague. Just interestingly enough, where did Moses know that this would stop the plague? When he was on top of the mountain for 40 days, a malach, an angel, came and tipped him off and said, hey, if there's ever a plague that breaks out, I'll tell you the trick. The trick is to make incense. And that's what he did. And what happened? It was very funny, a very interesting story. The Medrash tells, the angel of death, Malach HaMavis, the angel of death, he was complaining because his job was to take life, take the souls out of the body. And he saw that Aaron was coming with a pan for the Ketores. And he was like, wait a minute, I can't do my job if you do this. And Moses was fighting with him, saying, no, he has to do this. And he said, why are you not letting me do my job? And ultimately, they went ahead, and Aaron HaKohen went ahead and did the incense, and the Malach Mavis was quite upset. He was quite upset because he couldn't do his job. Which, from that episode, there's a few lessons, but one obvious one is that we have the ability to push off death to some extent. It says that King David was not going to die because he constantly said words of Torah. So the Malach HaMavis, the angel of death, said, I can't kill him. I have no way of killing him. He's always saying words of Torah. So at that point, I think it was King David. Maybe I'm wrong. David HaMelech? I think it was David HaMelech. So at that point, there was a bird that chirped really loud, and it broke a branch, and it distracted King David. So he stopped saying words of Torah for a moment, and his soul expired. Just a little bit of a tangent anecdote over there. Anyway, what happens with those pans? Those pans that they use for the incense, that Korach and his friends used for the incense, seemingly is a negative thing. Yeah, it was going against God, but God instructs Moses to take those pans and flatten them out, and they became the covering for the Mizbeach, for the ark. I mean, not for the ark, for the altar in which sacrifices would be given, which is kind of strange. No, they were seemingly like a negative thing. But again, it goes back to that point, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit more, that because their intentions were good, their implementation was bad, but their intentions were good. They had conviction, and God said, there's what to learn from here. I want that to be a reminder for all of the Jewish people. Put that in the centerpiece of the tabernacle, and learn from that. Learn that you should have conviction, stand for what you believe in, and strive to be more spiritual. So God says to Aaron, what happens next? God says to Aaron, I want like the people to be really clear that you're the main guy here. You're the real Kohen Gadol. So he says, take your mate, take your staff, and take all the staffs of the heads of the tribes. So there were another 12 people. put it in the tabernacle in a dark place, and put it in the middle of the tabernacle. I want everyone's staff to be dug into the ground, and put Aaron's in the middle. And it was at nighttime, and he said, whoever's staff grows almonds in the morning, then you will know who is the rightful Kohen Gadol. And obviously, Aaron's blossoms in the morning, which is a miracle. It wasn't like an almond branch; it was just a regular walking stick, and it grew almonds. Another lesson to be learned over here: why was it placed in the middle? Because they didn't want anybody to think, okay, it was like closer to the Shechina, or if it was closer to sunlight. It was right in the middle, covered by everything else, and it grew nevertheless. And just a quick little lesson being, a classic Hasidic lesson is that you might think you might go into a situation that's very dark, and in an environment that's not conducive for growth, for spiritual growth. Nevertheless, you can grow. It will grow there with the right intention and the right motivation, the right kavana, as we'd say. You can grow. However, says the Rebbe, you must know that the Torah doesn't say the next morning it grew almonds. What does it say? It talks about the stages. It says v'yifach parach. It grew flowers. V'yatzet tzitz, and then it started to bud, and then v'yigdol shkedim, and then shkedim, then almonds grew. Meaning that things take time. Things will actually work out. You just have to have the patience and don't skip any steps to making things happen. Like a nice quick little idea of what happened then. Okay, and then the Torah continues, and it talks about the obligation of the Kohanim and the Leviim in the tabernacle. Who guards the tabernacle and who guards the Beis Hamikdash? Those were the Leviim. That talks about like we said before, the gratuities, all the different gratuities that the Kohen would get. So the Kohen would get 2% of every produce that was grown by a Israelite, in other words, anybody who was not from the tribe of Levi. And then they would also, that was called Truma. Then they would also get the firstborn of every animal and of every person. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. The firstborn of every animal you had to give to the Kohen. How that was counted, we'll save that for the Parsha that really talks about that. But they get the firstborn of every animal, and they can feed it to their family, no problem. So they get a lot of meat, they get a lot of food, a lot of vegetables, no problem. Now, the firstborn person, it says, also belongs to the Kohen. Well, actually, it says it belongs to God. And therefore, because it belongs to me, says God, it belongs to the Kohen, who is my representative here on earth. Why? Because the firstborn, we all should have died. All firstborns should have, I'm not firstborn, I'm the secondborn, but all firstborn should have died in Egypt when the slaying of the firstborn. And God said, the firstborn Jews will belong to me, and therefore I'm not going to kill them. But the Torah also says you can redeem the firstborn, and we do that until today, called the Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn boy. Now, a firstborn boy doesn't mean the firstborn boy. It means if the firstborn is a boy, and it's with 5 silver coins, $5 silver is what we use over here. And that is performed, and it's given to the Kohen as a form of payment. Obviously, depending on the market price, it could go up and down. Some years it's $25, some years it's $75 if silver is pretty expensive. And that happens all the time. That happens in our shul. And if you're a firstborn Jew, and you haven't done it, you still have to do it. And you redeem it yourself. You should, when you're a little boy, obviously 30 days old, we do it when you're 30 days. Why 30 days? Because the Torah says, we're not sure whether a child will survive until after 30 days. And the ramifications of that are, if a child, God forbid, doesn't live past 30 days, their mourning rituals are different than for a child who does live past 30 days. And it's even more different if the child lives past 12 months. But 30 days, says the Torah, that's when you can be sure and healthy and confident that your child will live and be healthy. And so that's when God says, give it to me. So then the Levi also takes gratuities. What does it say over here? He says he takes 10%. He takes 10%. So he gets 10% from each Jew, 10% of their produce. But then he has to give 10% of that 10% to the Kohen. So the Kohen lives a pretty good life. I mean, it's not so bad. And that's called Trumas HaMeiser, which we still give till today. We give Meiser to remind ourselves of the Beis Hamikdash. And that's pretty much how it ends. It pretty much ends like that. So I want to go back to the beginning and let's look at a deeper part. Does anybody have any questions? That's just the basic, going through the basic Parsha if you haven't read it before. Anybody cool? You can ask any questions you want. All right. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so what happened? So Korach seems to be like a very terrible guy, a rebel. But what exactly happened? It says Korach, though. It says in the Zohar that Korach was the greatest Levi of the time. Now that's a wild statement, because who else was a Levi? Moses was a Levi. But nevertheless, the Zohar says Korach was the greatest Levi of his day. But he wasn't the leader, which really ticked him off. And in fact, the Zohar says, I'm just looking at it now, it says God creates Korach, how do I translate it? To be the personification of God in this world, which is hard to believe. In fact, the Zohar continues and he says, Karcha dinim, the word Korach, which we've translated a few different times, it really means his name, the Zohar calls it Karcha dinim. He cut off dinim, which are severities. Now, you have to understand what hair is about. Let's learn about hair. Hair means, Korach also means bald. The idea of hair is that there's two opposite sides. Hair is dead by the time it comes out. Hair represents Gevurah. If you're ever familiar with the Sevirot, the 10 Sefirot, there's Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferes. And Gevurah refers to severity, holding back. Now, Gevurah isn't necessarily bad. In fact, we need Gevurah. Yeah, and let's say a person let their child do whatever they want. The child's playing with a knife, and they'll say, well, if I take away the knife, then the child's going to cry. You need to have restraint. You need to hold it back, hold back your kindness, so to speak, for an even greater level of kindness, in this case, which is called Gevurah, a more stricter level of kindness. Even in a godly, let's look at a godly example, the way God created the world, God had to what's called do a tzimtzum. He had to contract himself, because if God was completely revealed, we would all be nullified. If God was, let's give an example. Albert Einstein probably could not have been a kindergarten teacher. Why? Because the way his mind operated, he thought way beyond his, what we call mikubalim, his recipients. If he wanted to explain the theory of relativity to a little child, he would have to contract all the knowledge, everything he knows about the theory of relativity, the way he understands the theory of relativity. He would have to, so to speak, misalik it, as we would say in Kabbalah. You have to get rid of it, stop thinking about it, and then try to give one little idea. Yeah, you ever try to explain a very complex idea to somebody? You can't just the way you know it. You have to, it's an unbelievable exercise. In fact, I have to figure out a way to say it to somebody who's not familiar with these concepts. So that's called tzimtzum, contraction. You're contracting, you're holding back all that knowledge. Because the person, if he receives it, will be nullified. It'll go beyond them. They won't be able to receive it. So you need what's called gevurah. Gevurah, that's rooted in gevurah and holding it back. And that's a great thing, because that allows us to appreciate a concept, a novel concept. And if the teacher is excellent at teaching, we'll be able to take his information and go back into understand it the way Albert Einstein understands it. Yeah, if Albert Einstein does a great idea of explaining the theory of relativity to a 7-year-old, eventually the 7-year-old might be able to get back to understand it the same way that Albert Einstein understands it. So the same thing with the Zohar refers to hair as Gevura. That's why women are rooted in Gevura. The soul of women are rooted in Gevura. Now, women in Judaism, women cover their hair once they're married. Why do they cover their hair? Because a double level of Gevura is not good. So they cover their hair and they put on different hair, or they wear a wig, not to look unattractive. They're more than welcome to look attractive. That's not the concept. But they're not allowed to have double Gevura. It's called double Gevura. So it says Korach was this level of, I'm just reading from the Zohar. He was this level of, he came from Gevura. And so the question is, how did he go all wrong? Let me just read a little bit more. So the idea of baldness really is cutting off that level of harshness. He was that representative that cut off now too much Gevura. So Korach emulated, he was a living example of this cutting off of the Gevura, which means a revelation of godliness, right? That breaking through that symptom that we spoke about, that contraction, he so to speak, opened it up to allow for more godliness to come through, more of that pure godliness, that pure theory of relativity, so to speak. He was that representative. He was the one who did it. He was the one that was able to do it. Like I said before, the name of somebody represents who they are. And like I said before, everything has a mixture of good and bad. So your name could be a wonderful name, but it also has like a way of being misused and misappropriated. But God planted within him this unbelievable potential. But what happened, says the Zohar, he said he allowed jealousy to get in his way. In other words, he allowed the materialistic part of himself, the body, to become more of a central theme in his life than it should have been. He should have let his soul come through and understood who he really was and let that shine through, but he let jealousy get in. God still gave him free choice, says the Zohar. And so since he was such a high level, says the Zohar, since he came from such a high place, there's a concept in Chassidus and in Kabbalah that the higher something is, the farther down it falls. Meaning like this. The classic example that I gave earlier was, why did Yitzchak, Isaac, spend so much time with his evil son, Esau? Wasn't Jacob more of like, he's the one that studied Torah, he was very kind, he honored his father beyond imagination, he honored his mother, but nevertheless, Isaac spent more time with the evil son because Isaac understood this concept that the farther something falls, meaning more, which means in this world, the more removed it seems from godliness, the higher it comes from God's essence. To the extent that the body, our physical body, is actually more holy than our soul on a certain level. What is our body? Our body is a representation of God's essence. God is alone in the world. It says, Einoid Mulvadoi. It says there is nothing else but God. Okay, that's a question that we have to do. That's more for the Chassidus class. But nevertheless, let's just work with that statement. Einoid Mulvadoi, there's nothing else but God. In this world, physicality is a representation of that. What? Why? Because a person only thinks about himself, and no two physical entities can take up the same space at the same time. Which means I am alone and there's nothing else. As we say, ani v'oid v'efsi oid. No, ani hu v'efsi oid. I am here and there's nothing else. A person really only thinks about a body, only thinks about himself. A body, a materialistic object, a physical object takes up space and no other thing can take up that space. That's a godly idea, that nothing else can take up that space. Only God takes up space. Nothing else can take up that space because that's a godly space. Only God can take up that space. There is nothing else outside of God. So therefore, nothing else can take up God's space. But God is trying to drill that into our heads and let us understand that by giving us a body that can sense that feeling of there is nothing else but beside me. So it's a concept that needs meditation, but that's what we should understand. So the body itself comes from a higher place than the soul. Your soul can sense godliness or something beyond itself, and in fact, it always strives to be beyond itself. So Korach, because he was a representation of God, says the Zohar. He was this representation. He was this person that was going to open up the channels, so to speak, to allow godliness to come in. He wanted to fall even further. God, so to speak, like stopped him and said, okay, here's your mission. I want you to do your mission. But then he took it even further. He was trying to fall even further because he was taking that high level, whatever he represented, this level of cutting of the dinim that we said, opening of the channel, the cutting of those channels to allow godliness to come through. He was trying to lower himself even more. He more focused on his body. So God said, fine, you're not going to focus on your mission. You want to lower yourself even further, then I'm going to open up the ground and you're going to fall through, so to speak, right? That's why he died from an earthquake, an unprecedented phenomenon. And in fact, it says in Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, that we read every week in the summer, it says there were 10 things that were created by the beginning of creation. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It says the shamir, but there's many things. It says, the worm that was used to cut the stones for the Beis Hamikdash, for the Holy Temple, Aaron's staff, the mun, the concept of the manna, and the other one, it says the ability for the earth to open up, the earthquake, like this ability for like a sinkhole. I don't know about a sinkhole. It's more like an earthquake, and it just opened up all the way. I don't know if he fell to the level of magma in the earth or whatever. It doesn't really get into that. Maybe it does, but I haven't seen anything. But nevertheless, that concept was created from the beginning of the earth, the beginning of time, which kind of opens up a question that I had a discussion with somebody on right now. I know some of you I've had discussion with as well. It says that the Torah preceded the world by 2,000 years. Whatever that means, time itself is a invented concept, so we're not exactly sure what that means. There really was time, but nevertheless, the Torah preceded the world. And in fact, the Zohar says, "Istalkel ba'araisa ubara alma." It said God looked into the Torah and created the world. That the world is a blueprint. The Torah is a blueprint for the world. So if that's the case, let's go back to the very first story in the very first episode in the Torah. What happened? Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, they eat from the tree of knowledge, and God says, whoa, you went against my word, I'm kicking you out. Now, Adam actually knew Torah. He was learning Torah. And when he came to that part of the Torah, he said, my high. What the heck? You set me up. This is you wrote this 2,000 years before I even existed. Of course I was going to fail. Why are you getting so mad at me? And the God said, you're right. It's true. And it's also true that you have free choice. I know you can't understand that, but that's the truth. There's divine providence in everything that happens in the world. Nothing is done by accident. It's all done intentionally. Everything that's created is done with an intention. Even the swinging of a blade of grass, says the Baal Shem Tov. Every blade of grass that swings at a particular time has an angel saying to it, a malach that's hitting it and says, move, move. that everything is orchestrated by divine providence. Nevertheless, you also have free choice, which is very hard to understand why, but we know why it's hard to understand. Because the concept of divine providence and free choice are created entities. These did not exist before the world was created, just like we didn't exist before the world was created. God operates above creation. He is the writer of the game. He is the writer of the movie, or it's not a movie. He's the writer of this game, so to speak. I'm not a game theorist, but they probably understand it the most. Because he's above it, he doesn't see any contradiction. You and I can't understand that. We can understand it to a certain extent, but we don't operate like that because we can't imagine what life is like beyond our world. And I'm not just saying our physical world, even the spiritual world. We don't have what's beyond once creation started, the world of Atzilut, the world of Atzilus. If you're familiar with any of the Kabbalah, which we'll get into in another class, it's not a stira. And it's not a stira, I'm sorry, I'm using a lot of Hebrew here. It's not a contradiction. And that was the answer that God gave to Adam, and Adam was satisfied. So even this whole concept of Korach and everything like that, the Korach and the earthquake was already created from creation. It was all set up. Everything is by divine providence, which, to be honest, gives like a certain level of, you should take comfort in that everything is divinely orchestrated, yet you also have free choice. It's not every answer. I can't explain the answer to you, and believe me, in yeshiva and sitting with friends and big geniuses, even that there's no answer. I can't explain that concept to you, but we're okay with that. We're okay with that. The idea of contradictions, we know by God it's not a contradiction. It's not a big deal. So therefore, we take comfort in that. We know there's divine providence, and we know that there is free choice. So that's why there was this earthquake in something unprecedented. So the question is, says the Zohar, how could Korach make? I'm just translating. How could Korach make such a mistake? Why did he think he should be a leader? Says the Zohar. So it was like I said before. He saw Korach was a prophet. Miriam was a prophet. Aaron was a prophet. Moses was a prophet. There were a lot of prophets. In fact, even those people that were involved, the other people, the 250 men, they were also prophets. The only problem is a prophet isn't always clear at what he's looking at. He's not always sure at what he's looking at. Unlike Moses, he's very clear. He's very clear what he looks at. But like if you look in Isaiah and Ezekiel, Yeshayahu and Yecheskel, it's very cryptic. And even at times you'll see they write, it's unclear to me what I'm looking at, but I'll describe it to you. I'll try my best to describe to see what you're looking at. I'll try my best to describe what I'm looking at. So what did Korach see? Korach saw that Shmuel Hanavi was going to come from him. However, I don't know how prophecy works. I'm not a prophet. I don't know if you guys knew that. I'm not a prophet. Shmuel Hanavi came from him, and he saw that there were 24 watches that were going to come from him, which gets into how a watch is the people who were involved in dealing with the temple, like cleaning it up and singing, right? To the jobs of the Levium, of the Levites, was to sing and to clean it up, which was like a holy cleanup. It's not like cleaning up toilets and whatever. I mean, you're cleaning up God's house. It's not a bad job. As well as they were the guards. And he saw that he had 24 of these watches of these groups, whatever. It's like a big deal. If we ever get to that, when we get to that Parsha, we'll talk about it. So he said, wait a minute. I have like this holy family, this prophet. I have this prophet who's going to come from me, who's just as prophetic as Moses. And I didn't get appointed as the leader. And when his wife got hold of that, she flipped out, obviously. Like we said, she got her ego stepped in. Just reading a little bit further along in the He also saw, says the Zohar, that in this rebellion, there would be, says the Zohar, everyone would die except for one. And who did he think? He thought it was going to be himself, because he saw that Shmuel was going to come from him, Samuel was going to come from him. But we know from the story that On ben Peles was the one that ultimately came out, and that worked out pretty well for him. Before I go into connected to what the Rebbe says, as I'm a Lubavitcher Chassid, I'm a Chassid of Chabad, so therefore, a lot of my stuff's going to be about the Rebbe and Chabad. Take it or leave it. Does anybody have any questions? Ask any question that you want. Yeah, Jeremy, you have a question? Oh, are you all muted? No. Yeah. You have a question, Jeremy? I see you looking.
Yeah. So the you said like Korach is the Gevura.
Yeah.
Korach is Gevura, right? And what is the difference between? I mean, maybe it's in the Kabbalah class, or it's okay to ask now.
Yeah, in Kabbalah. But ask, what's your question?
I want to ask, like, what is the difference between Gevura and Chokhmah? Like, it's.
Yeah, well, Chokhmah. Chokhmah has to do with wisdom, and Gevura has to do really with emotions. Chokhmah means wisdom. It means Chokhmah, Bina, and Das mean, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Whatever these levels, the way you perceive information. And Gevura is the way the soul interacts with the body and the outside world. You know what I mean? It's one is more internal. They really have one's more internal, and then one is like, what do you do with that information? Once you have this wisdom, what do you do with it? How do you act upon it? So Gevura is a general concept, this general idea of maybe at times it means you should withhold or you should subdue, because sometimes you need to subdue, like we said, certain ideas, certain concepts. We don't want the soul to leave the body. The soul wants to leave the body. The soul wants to go back to God, to God's essence. The example says, Ner Havaya Nishmas Adam. It says the neshama, the soul of man, is like the candle, is like the fire on a candle. Meaning, just like you see when you have a candle that's lit, the flame is a flame on a candle. The flame is always trying to go up. Even if you turn the flame upside down, the flame is always trying to go back up. It's trying to leave the candle and go back to its source. What Kabbalah speaks a lot about. It's trying to leave its source. Same thing, the soul is constantly trying to leave the body. The soul does not understand this world. The soul is here. It's forced within the body. It's kept in the body. And God wants it that way because God has a certain mission for the soul. He needs it to do its commandments. Everybody has commandments. Some have 613, some have 7. Nevertheless, everybody has a commandment to do. So the soul needs to stay inside the body. And the way it stays inside the body is by the way the soul stays within the body is from the body itself. The body keeps the soul within. The body is like a gevura. It holds it back so it can fulfill its mission. The soul can actually fulfill its mission in this world. Does that make sense? It's kind of a long explanation for a very simple concept. Yeah. So in this case, the soul understands what it's supposed to do, but nevertheless, the soul knows what it's supposed to do, but the body also knows what it's supposed to do. The body has its own chachma, bina, and das, and understands that its job is to keep the soul here. So it uses its gevura to keep the soul here. At a certain point, God lifts the body becomes weak. It weakens the ability of the body to keep the soul within, and therefore the soul will leave the body. Does that make sense? That's what it means, passing away, so to speak. Does anybody have any questions before I move on? Nobody? They say in yeshiva, if you don't have any questions, it means you don't understand. So I'm not, just throwing that out there. Okay. I'm just trying to read a little bit. Okay, we did that. Coming back to the beginning. Now, just like how we have this will be like I think this will be the last point. I think it's a very powerful point. The human body, the human, many different levels. We have the conscious and the subconscious. We have the physical and we have the spiritual, and there are many levels in between. There are many different interpretations and many different levels in understanding each story in the Torah, understanding a person's name, understanding an episode. So even though I gave you I gave you more or less an external reasoning as to why Korach did what he did. It was jealousy. And then we went a little bit deeper and we said that he came from a very high level of God, and that's why he fell below. But there's another reason why, another layer as to why Korach was upset with Aaron. He was very upset with Aaron. And he didn't care about Moses. It was about Aaron, the Kohen Gadol. And it had to do with Korach's personality. Korach was an introvert. The Leviim, a Levite, is an introverted person. He's a very Gevurah type of person. And that serves well at times. Can you guys hear that noise? I apologize. It serves well at times. In fact, let me give you an example of when that served very well. When the Jewish people were in Egypt, the only people that were not enslaved were the Levites. The Levites were not enslaved, and they were really the ones that were like a stiff-necked people to a certain extent. They wouldn't allow themselves to be enslaved, and they continued to learn Torah, and they defied Pharaoh, and until ultimately Pharaoh bent to their will and was like, okay, you guys can do what you want, go live in Goshen, study Torah, you can be priests, I like that. That's how Moses was able to move in and out and talk to Pharaoh. How could he have talked to Pharaoh? Well, he was a runaway slave. He wasn't a runaway slave, that's why, because he was part from the tribe of Levi, as was Aaron. He was from the tribe of Levi. But the difference is, anyway, they were introverted people. They were strong people. Gevurah means strength, but it means here like we mean it to like hold back, but like because it takes a lot of strength to hold to temptation. To withhold and giving into temptation takes a lot of strength. So, what Moses, what we spoke about before, that the Kohen Gadol never left the temple. But what was unique about the Kohen Gadol, and especially Aaron HaKohen, was although he lived in the temple and he never really got to hang out and party like everybody else, he had the ability to relate to everybody. And that's why when he passed away, we see this by when he passed away, they mourned him more than they even mourned Moses. Because a person could come and he was able to relate to them right away. And it was this idea. How do we see that? A very interesting idea, says the Kabbalah. It spoke about Gevurah. When the Leviim became Leviim, when the Levites had to become Levites, this only happened once. God, in last week's Parsha, God said you have to shave all of your hair, your eyebrows, your legs, everything. And when Korach saw, the only person that did not have to do that were the Kohanim. And when Korach saw Aaron with a beautiful beard, he said, look how beautiful he is. He gets to keep all of his hair. And his wife was really egging him on, saying, look how beautiful he is. He has all of his hair. Can you imagine if your wife is saying, wow, look how beautiful that man is? That would be make me kind of jealous, maybe. I'm not sure. Unless I disagreed. He got to keep his beard. But what does that mean on a spiritual level? The hair, although it grows out dead, it grows down, which means the ability to relate to somebody. I can bring, even though I come from a very lofty level, I can bring myself down without losing my character. I can bring myself down, says the Zohar, and Aaron was able to relate. And that made Korach jealous. Because Korach, it says that he was bald. Korach means bald. The word Korach itself means bald. He didn't have that ability to relate. And this is a fundamental concept in Torah. What was he saying? Aaron, stop relating to people. You're supposed to be removed. You're supposed to not talk to people. You're supposed to be removed. You have the finest garments, living in the temple. Stop talking to people. But that was Korach's projection. Korach was jealous. Korach didn't have that ability within himself to relate to other people. And when you have an imperfection within yourself, you project it onto somebody else. You think that is the proper way. Deep down, you know that's not the proper way. But you need to unload that insecurity onto somebody else. And in this case, he unloaded it onto Aaron. And he was a very intelligent person, Korach. And he came up with all these different explanations, says the Zohar, says the Kabbalah, as to why I should be the top. No, you shouldn't be the top, man, says God. You're trying to just bring everybody else down. And there's a great story. He was just trying to bring everybody else down. And I like to illustrate it with a bit of a great story that I tell all the time. There was once a Rebbe of Chabad, and he had two children. The older one was Zalman Aaron, we'll call him Rizah, and the second one was Shalom Dovber. The older one, the firstborn child, was shorter than his brother, the secondborn, and it irked him. One day they were playing by a tree that was uprooted near a hole, and he lightly pushed his brother, the older brother pushed the younger brother into the hole and said, "Aha, I'm finally taller than you." Now their father was watching, and he told the boys, "Come into my study." And he told his oldest son, "Bring a chair." He brought a chair. He said, "Stand up on the chair." He stood up on the chair. And he said, "If you want to make yourself greater, pick yourself up. Don't push other people down. Raise yourself up. Don't push other people down." And that story is rooted in this Parsha. That don't project, well, I guess it's not exactly, it doesn't very much fit. It fits in a different way. But don't project your insecurity onto somebody else. And in fact, it'll bring you down. That's all it's going to do, is it's going to bring you further down. Nothing will happen to that guy, because the truth will be exposed. And that ultimately was Korach's downfall. Anybody have any? I think I'll stop here. There's a lot more, but time. Anybody have any questions? By the way, everybody has my WhatsApp. More than welcome, always. I mean, that's part of what you paid for. You can ask me any question you want. If I don't know the answer, although I think I'll know a lot of the answers, I'm part of a group of Torah scholars. In fact, the rabbi of my shul, of my synagogue, Rabbi Silberberg, is the head of the Beis Din. He's the head of the Jewish court here. He's a very knowledgeable guy. That's what he does all day. And then his son is a big-time teacher, and he will teach here. He's going to give a few classes as well. Just wait, the daytime classes. And then there's the son-in-law. By the way, they're all Kohanim, so they're very nice and kind. So don't worry. I have plenty of resources. This is just my little library in my room. But, we have more books. Don't worry. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Please, feel free to ask. If not, I'm just going to end it. Okay. I'm gonna put this recording. I'll send it out now that we have both recordings. And take care. And tomorrow I'll do a little bit of a demonstration of what davening is like and give a Devar Torah, like a pre-Shabbat davening. We'll say one of the prayers. I'll sing one of the prayers that we usually do together with one of the songs that we'll normally do right before we make Kiddush. We bless the day. And I'll do a paragraph each week. Maybe you'll learn the song. You'll have the recording, so you can learn the songs, and then you'll know the davening. You'll know the prayers. And we'll walk away with a Devar Torah, and we'll have a holy Shabbos. So anyway, have a good night. A Chodesh Tov. It's Chodesh Tammuz. Rosh Chodesh Tammuz is the beginning of the summer. Everyone's getting their beach balls, and we're getting ready for davening and learning here in the northern hemisphere. So I wish you all a good night, a good Chodesh. Tomorrow is also Rosh Chodesh. Maybe I'll speak a little bit about Rosh Chodesh tomorrow as well, what that means, and especially Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. And that's it. Sei gesund, as we say in Yiddish. Laila Tov. Okay, be well, everybody.
Laila Tov.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.